I have 3 drivers here that may go overlooked in 2024, but they are killers when it comes to what they are offering. Let's take a look at them. So before we take a look at these 3 drivers, I want you to hit the subscribe button for us down below. We're trying to get to 300,000 subscribers before we reach the open. Join Team Fryer, hit it down below. Let's take a look at the drivers. So now the dust has settled on the big releases from the big manufacturers, it's time to take a look at 3 drivers that I think are going to be overlooked, but actually are delivering pretty much to the same as what the big manufacturers are, but there's a couple of benefits in them. And the first one is this, a brand that we probably wouldn't really think of when we come to drivers, and that is Cleveland, and it is the Cleveland Launcher XL2. We have had the Cleveland Launcher on the channel before, maybe about a year or so ago, and they have done a good job of actually upgrading from where that is. Firstly, on looks, for me, it's a little bit similar to what we see from the last time's model. There's some embossing on the head, which for me, I don't like. It almost sort of sits up off the face. But that being said, the actual profile of the driver, knowing that this driver is for the mid to high handicapper, more towards the higher handicapper end of the spectrum, the actual profile of it behind the golf ball, with it having a larger footprint and it actually hugging the ground down below the golf ball towards the back, it just inspires confidence for me when you put it in behind the golf ball. And when I got it down there, I thought, I know what this is going to do. It's just going to launch, it's going to get up in the air, and it's probably going to go pretty straight. So for me, looks wise, they definitely ticked that box off to provide that confidence. Sound wise, wasn't a big fan of it. It's very tingy, and that's not my favourite sound when it comes to drivers. I know some people prefer that, and it is personal preference, but for me, just a little bit too tingy. You could change that a little bit with the shaft that you're using and maybe the ball that you're using, but just to be aware, if you are looking at one of these drivers, it does have that more high-pitched sound when you are hitting it. In terms of technology, they've done a little bit more from what they had in the original XL. Now, in terms of the head, the structure of the head, there's a little bit more channeling towards the back to help with aerodynamics, to help quicken up the club head speed, probably because, again, with it being at that higher end of the handicapper spectrum, you want to try and maybe gain a few yards just by the actual design of the head. The rebound frame's still in there, and the main frame XL face to help with those misstruck shots, deliver good ball speed. But for me, the biggest improvement is that it's got the adjustable loft sleeve. Last time it didn't have it. If you bought a 9-degree driver, you got a 9-degree driver, as where now the head can actually go from 9 degrees all the way up to 12 degrees. So you're getting a lot of options in there. So you can actually have a play around and see what suits you instead of having to just have that one driver and play. In terms of its performance, it did what I said a minute ago. When I put it behind the golf ball, I was confident that I could get away with a lot, and on my missed strikes from centre to toe, I was still seeing a pretty consistent ball flight. It launched nice and high, it went really straight, and if we think back to my TaylorMade review, check that out if you haven't, the QI10 Max I said was the straightest driver that I've ever hit and easiest one that I've ever hit. This reminded me very much of it. It just was easy to get going. It wasn't the longest, and the data did show this. I wasn't expecting length from this driver, but again, with it being at that high handicap bracket, I would see that it was doing what I would want, getting the ball up on my misstruck shots. It wasn't carving all over the place. I kept a pretty tight dispersion and felt that I could get this thing going really straight. The other big benefit of this driver is that it only costs £379. Now, it is cheaper than all the big ones, but for me, I think it's maybe just a little bit too expensive when we're thinking of a Cleveland. If they could drop it under £300, I think they would break through with that driver because, like I say, performance-wise, it was standing up with some of the big drivers. But then when that price point is creeping up to where the big brands are, I would probably maybe sway away from it and just go towards those, but definitely one if you're in that higher handicapper bracket that you should be looking at. Comment down below for me as well, guys. You've seen the Cleveland Launcher XL2 now. What are some overlooked drivers from none of the big manufacturers that you think we should be testing, or that you think would be a driver that should be looked at for 2024? The second driver that will be overlooked in 2024 comes from Mizuno, and it is the St Max. Now this thing, I would say, is the all-rounder of the three that I'm going to show you today, because when we actually look at this in terms of the looks of it, it looks decent. I'm not the biggest fan of the shimmery or shiny top head on a driver. I like to see a bit more of a dull finish, especially when there's carbon in the roof of the driver or the crown of the driver. I like to see that it's a little bit duller, because when you get out into the sun, it's not glaring up in your eyes as much. But for me, it doesn't look like a driver that is specifically for a real high handicapper or specifically for a real low handicapper. It sort of looks the part for everybody. When you put it in behind the golf ball, it has a slightly shallower face, so you get the feeling that you're going to be able to launch it quite easily while still having not an overly large footprint. It does have a large footprint, but not as big or as low to the ground as maybe the Cleveland Launcher XL2 that we've just seen. It looks decent. Like I say, just change it to maybe having that duller look and it would really be a go-getter from there. In terms of the performance, now when we got this thing down at the driving range, I was seeing that it was pretty easy to hit. I was finding again that my missed strikes, whether it was toe or heel, I was getting good flights out of them. I wasn't seeing too much carve on them. It wasn't as straight as the Launcher XL2, but it was definitely easy to handle. It was easy to pop up in the air and it was easy to keep on target. Distance-wise, I wasn't too sure when we were down at the driving range if it was shorter or longer than normal. I couldn't quite gauge it, but actually after hitting some balls in the studio and looking at where we are with the data there, it's not too bad. It's not as long as I would expect my normal driver to go. It comes in at 274 yards, but that for a driver that is again aimed at the mid to high handicapper, I'm not expecting it to be the longest driver. It was producing some good numbers, but the big thing for me is that whether you were maybe a 10 handicapper, a 20 handicapper, even down into the single figures, I think you could comfortably use this driver because it's not really lacking loads of distance, and it's not aimed and looking like a real high handicapper's driver. It looks very similar to the STZ model that we see already on the market from Mizuno. Technology-wise, it's pretty much following suit from what we see from all the other ST drivers in the 230 lineup as well. Carbon in the top, carbon in the bottom. It's also got the Cortex chamber in there as well, which is a little bit longer across the face and around the perimeter of the golf club. Again, just making sure that that stability is there and that speed is there on those off-centered strikes. In terms of sound as well, for me, this was probably one of the better of the three sounding drivers, if not the best. It sounded really thuddy. It didn't sound too tingy. It sounded almost like what I would expect an LS model driver to sound. So, like I say, for me, the best overall driver out of the three of them. Only drawback I would say with this one is that it's £449 in stores at the moment. If Mizuno went and did what Cobra did a few years ago when they released their F9 model and came in and really dropped down below where we see the likes of TaylorMade, Callaway, Ping, and they came in at, let's say, $349, I think they would really sway loads of people, because for the last few years they've actually delivered really good drivers, but the price points match the big brands. Now, you're more likely as a consumer just to defect straight to one of the bigger brands because it's easy, everyone knows what they do, as where it takes a little bit more persuading, I think, to get into a Mizuno. They've got the product, maybe if that price point could be the barrier where they really get in and get going with the driver. But overall, an overlooked one in 2024, definitely worth trying. And our third overlooked driver for 2024 is this one, the Wilson Dynapower Carbon model. Now, it has been out for a couple of months, but it is a driver that is going to be carrying on through the 2024 season. The model that I tested, the carbon model, that is the titanium head as well in this lineup, which I'll get to shortly. But the model that I tested, the carbon, is designed more to be used by the mid to low handicapper. It's one that's looking for a little bit more distance, and it's looking for a little bit more speed, and it's looking for that workability. So it's aimed at the player that's getting the centre a little bit more frequently, and probably the one that I saw myself probably liking the most. For me, when it comes to looks, I like this one a lot. It reminds me a little bit of one of the PXG drivers, because what we see is the carbon on top, on the crown, has that dull effect on it. It's not got the shimmery look to it. Then we have the sort of leading edge of the driver that is the titanium part of the driver that is that matte black finish. So it looks really sleek, it looks really stealth. It has the little Dynapower logo just etched in towards the heel. And in terms of when you sit it in behind the golf ball, it's got quite a deep face and then quite a compact look to the head, as where the other two that we've seen already in the video are maybe a slightly shallower face, and maybe the footprint stretches a little bit more towards the back end of the driver, as where this one looks a bit more meaty, looks like it's going to pack a punch. Even the detail down below, there's not loads going on, it still looks sleek, it looks stealth. It has a 12-gram weight port at the back that is in a fixed location, and overall, for me, like I say, probably the best looking driver out of the three. The only difference when we look at the titanium versus the carbon is that one's titanium, one's carbon. So when you're looking down on it from above, it has more of the sort of one-piece look about the driver, as where the carbon, you can see where that sits on top of the head. In terms of the technology, as I've alluded to, there is the carbon on top and bottom, and this is to aid with weight placement around the head and see that it has more weight up towards the front, so it can deliver a little bit more of a CG located towards that front, so we're going to be able to reduce the spin, because this is going to be a driver, like I said earlier, that is for that player that is finding the centre a little bit more and also getting a little less spin. There's also the PKR2 face, which is designed to help aid those off-centered strikes if they were to happen, which they are going to happen, with ball speeds. We're not always going to get the middle, so if we do get toe and heel, we want to see that it's still delivering some good numbers off those missed strikes. Now, in terms of a feel and a sound, when we took this one down to the driving range, it definitely felt a little bit more powerful, as where the other two drivers, like I say, were maybe aimed to the mid to high handicappers and keeping it a bit more consistent. This one was feeling like there was a bit more punch behind it, like it was really packing some heat behind this driver. It did look a little bit longer. On a few of the off-centered hits, it was a little bit unruly. I felt that there was getting a little bit more carve, and even when I took it to the studio, there was a couple of shots that I got out of the toe, and I did see that dive a little bit more. If you were looking for maybe the more forgiving model and staying in the Wilson line, that's probably where you would fall back towards the titanium one. But when I actually get some data on this driver, it's done well. 276 yards of carry, which is a little bit under where I would see my normal driver carry being, round about that 285 to 290 mark. But I didn't have the shaft I wanted, I did only have it in a stiff, but it was doing quite a lot of good things for me. It looks great, it sounds great, it felt great, and when I was getting it, it was pretty straight when I got it out of the middle, and it was, you know, producing some good numbers. The big bonus is that this one again comes in at £379. If you did go for the titanium model as well, that's £349, so quite a big saving. And for a brand a bit on par with Mizuno, I would say, when we look at drivers, just being that bit cheaper, £70 cheaper, I would probably say more people would sway towards this one. So they probably got the edge there just because of price, because it is performing, it is giving the data, it's giving the numbers we want, it looks good, and then it's just that little bit further away from where the big brands are. So a good driver overall. The Wilson Dynapower, I think, is one that if you are looking to save a few pounds, is definitely worth trying. So 3 drivers that I think will go overlooked in 2024, but definitely shouldn't, just because of the reasons that I've given you, especially when we think we've got something for maybe the high, mid and low handicappers at better price points. These 3 drivers you should be trying out as well. Remember to comment down below and let me know any others that you think are going to be overlooked in 2024, and keep your eyes peeled for more reviews coming soon on the channel. Why not watch one of them here right now?